Is Sean O'Malley the UFC's next big star? Dwain and I are going to discuss this topic ahead of his upcoming fight with Aljamain Sterling. But before we do that, make sure you subscribe as we've got brand new videos coming out every week. So Dwain, firstly, stars throughout the years in the UFC, one thing we've noticed from them is that they make themselves, whether it be they are knockout artists, submission specialists, just even if they're just damn entertaining in the cage or indeed on the microphone. Do you believe that Sean O'Malley possesses these qualities needed to be the next big star?
Yes, I think he does, right? He's already one of the biggest stars on the roster, and he's only had a handful of ranked fights. So yeah, I feel like he does, right? He's fairly decent on the mic. He's a highlight machine, but I think he needs to kind of just iron everything out a little bit, just get slightly better on the mic, because sometimes he's really good and then sometimes it feels like he's stuttering a little bit, like he's struggling to get his words out. I think if he just tweaks a little bit, I think he's got everything needed to be that next big UFC star.
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? With fighters, that's their job as a fighter. So like you'd think on paper that if they're good on the microphone, that's just a bonus. They shouldn't have to be. But it's just the way of it, isn't it? Like not everyone can be as good on the microphone as Conor McGregor or The Rock or something like that. But it seems that completes the full package. We've said before, if some fighters are ridiculously skilled in the cage and actually in the fights, but they're just dull to listen to on the microphone, it doesn't draw people to your press conferences, all that kind of thing. So it all complements each other. But Dwain, speaking of this mentality, Sean was already a fan favorite before he was even ranked. He used to joke before, didn't he, saying name someone else who's unranked and who's a millionaire. But he was the hype train even in 2020 when he made his comeback, and we've seen hype trails get derailed over the years numerous times. His controversial, I suppose you could call it, win over Petr Yan, do you think he actually proved himself to have the championship mentality in that fight, or do you think there's still a question on there?
It's definitely still a question that kind of looms over, isn't it? We've not seen him in championship rounds yet. We don't know what his mentality is going to be like. But I think he proved in that Petr Yan fight, he's got that ability to not panic. I think a lot of people that lack that sort of championship mentality is when they're in trouble, that's it. They give up and they struggle, they panic, they throw themselves into something wild, whereas Sean kept a level head and got that decision win. So I think he certainly got that mentality, but we need to see more of him. And I think we'll get a lot of those questions answered when he fights this Saturday.
Yeah, I think you're bang on there. I think a lot of these questions will actually be revealed to us. A lot of these answers will be, But like we've seen him before in the fights. I think was it against someone, Louise Smolka, where even the commentary team was saying he's just chasing the walkaway knockout. And you thought that would be his biggest downfall because he thinks he could do that to everyone. But again, in the Petr Yan fight, although controversial as it may be, it proved that he can be patient, he can be disciplined, and he doesn't just want to headhunt. He can actually, he can access all areas, defend on the ground, defend his takedowns, and obviously he edged out a decision. So I actually think that Sean, he's a lot more, he's got that championship mentality a lot more than what people give him credit for.
Yeah, you're probably right there, because you're right. Before, I don't remember who he was fighting, but like you were saying, he was constantly, he'd punch, he'd drop him and he'd walk off. And he did like 3-4 times. You think, you can't do that. You need to be able to finish, and I mean, I know he's got a good finish rate anyway, but I was concerned about that. I thought, if he goes into a fight like that with Petr Yan, drops him and then backs off. But you're right, he didn't do that, did he? He kept on top of him. He kept trying to do everything he could to win. So I think he knows when to switch it on and knows when he can get that sort of highlight reel knockout.
100%. I think he's, like we said, he's a lot more well-rounded than what a lot of people give him credit for. The mentality, not just in the physical aspect of it. Well, speaking of which, Dwain, although he will dispute it, there is actually one loss on his record that came from Chito Vera a few years ago. Now, do you think Sean himself, he will allow this loss to loom over him, or do you think he's done enough in his career, especially with this title shot, that he can just surpass Chito now? He doesn't need to gain that loss back. He doesn't need to even the score.
I think, unfortunately, that loss will always loom over O'Malley. Just in the sense that it's his one career loss and it will be there forever. But it all depends what Cheeto does next. If Cheeto loses to Pedro Munez on Saturday, O'Malley's got bigger fish to fry. He needs to not concern himself with that, right? Like, ideally, Cheeto keeps winning, O'Malley keeps winning, and then they meet in the middle and we get that big rematch. But I think, unless you hate Sean O'Malley or you're a bit, there is an asterisk next to that loss, isn't there? There's no doubt about it. Whether, O'Malley was doing really well in that fight, even though it was short, and he got injured. I'm not saying it's a fluke because it's not. Cheeto did that on purpose. He did really well, but there is that, it was an injury, and that's the way, a lot of people, unless everyone knows injury wins only count if you don't like the fighter, right? I mean, that's just the way it goes. So there is an asterisk next to it, but of course it is a loss for O'Malley, and it will loom over him until he gets that win back, or like you're saying, until he goes far enough that it doesn't matter. It's like, Cheeto's so far down now, it doesn't matter at all.
I think that's a good point as well, because a lot of the Sean O'Malley haters, they kind of clutch onto, Cheeto knocked him out. And you're like, yeah, you make out as if it were like a head kick knockout and then he just ran away celebrating and Sean O'Malley was out cold. Like you said, there's a question mark there. It's like when people, they seem to say like, Conor's the only one who won a round against Khabib. And you're like, but what happened for the rest of the fight? It's Nate Diaz and Leon Edwards.
He did. I'll cling to that. Yeah, Conor did win that third round, and it was an early stoppage. He was just giving Khabib a pat on the arm. He won that fight. All right.
It was just congratulating him. That's exactly it. But this weekend, when he fights Aljamain Sterling, whether he wins or loses, I think at bantamweight there are so many more fun matchups for Sean himself. A personal favourite of mine, a dream fight that I would love to see, is Sean O'Malley versus Henry Cejudo. Are there any that spring to mind for you that you'd love to see him against?
Yeah, I think it's got to be O'Malley versus Corey Sandhagen. I think that is such a fun fight. But after seeing Corey fight the other day, and he made it a real ground battle, I wonder if that's what will happen. Because it's interesting, isn't it? With MMA, you get two grapplers fighting, it turns into a kickboxing match. You get two strikers fighting, sometimes it can turn into a grappling match like it did with Corey the other day. So maybe we might get Sean versus Corey on the mat and they're just grappling each other and try to get a submission, which I don't know necessarily go well for Corey if he does try and do that, but it's a fight I'd love to see. And Cejudo versus O'Malley, I mean, that's such a fun fight, isn't it? The press conference alone would be so fun because they're both a bit cringy, like in a good way, and I think they just sort of just rip on each other. But I'm not sure what's next for Cejudo, whether he is going to be, is he really going to make this big career comeback, or is that kind of it for him now? Should he kind of have stayed retired?
Well, that's the thing. Cejudo was calling out anyone who'd listen to him, wasn't he? Sean O'Malley included as well. And since he lost to Aljamain and then he's had to pull out of his fight with Cheeto Vera, you think, the roads and the mountain is getting higher every time, for Cejudo. So you think, is Cejudo just going to become a Cheeto Vera and he just surpasses him? But no matter about those two fights, Corey Sandhagen is one that I would love to see myself, and which is a real possibility, especially if, Sean gets through Aljamain, because Corey's coming off a win. They're both so evenly matched size-wise. So, I don't know. It's just could be a potential real barn burner, but I think there's plenty of matchups for bantamweight for Sean O'Malley. But a lot of people still believe that Sean actually lost his last fight against Petr Yan. Do you think that Sean needs to go out there and get a dominant win over Aljamain Sterling in order to solidify himself as a true, champion and contender?
Well, Aljamain still hasn't done that, and yet he's the champion. I'm a big fan of Aljamain. I like him a lot. I picked him to beat Petr Yan in that second fight, but even he's still not solidified himself as this top bantamweight champion. But I think if he beats O'Malley, that'll be like the most title defenses in the whole division. He's breaking records, and yet we still doubt him as the champion. And I think it's because there's always an asterisk next to his wins. It's like, oh, well, this was a split decision. Oh, well, this guy was injured. Oh, well, this was a disqualification. This was also a split decision. There's always an issue with Aljamain. So I think the big problem is now for Aljamain is he's so unlikable that if anybody beats him now, that's it. It's like, bang, right, this guy's our guy now. He's the top. So I think people will just kind of forget that and go, yeah, Sean O'Malley's the best now. He's the champ. But the problem is Sean is such a decisive figure, isn't he? You know, like people either love him or hate him. So you will get these people, even if he does get loads of wins, and go, well, he still lost to Cheeto. You're like, well, Cheeto's now on the prelims, mate, so I won't worry about that.
Well, I think Piotr Jan will be close to that as well pretty soon if he doesn't do something special. But you're right with Aljamain Sterling. Obviously, he won the belt via disqualification, arguably lost the rematch with Piotr Jan. I picked Aljamain to win that as well. Then, fought TJ Dillashaw, who had a shoulder dislocation, shoulder injury. Then Henry Cejudo, who hasn't fought in 3 years. So there's always a handicap, if you will, with each of one of his opponents. This time, if Aljamain can get through him, there's no more excuses. There's none of this. But I do believe that's all we've got time for. Thank you, everyone, for watching. If you can like, comment, and subscribe, it really does help us out.